Of all my failures as a parish priest, the one I regret the most was a little boy I'll call Leo. Leo was about 5 years old, and his mother, I'll call her Allison, and he were newcomers at the first parish I served. Leo was a handful. I can't remember exactly what was going on with this kid, whether it was a diagnosis of some kind or a trauma history or both, but sitting still, following directions, and being quiet were all a struggle for him. Allison had adopted Leo as a single mother. She had no family nearby. She was really on her own, and she was at the end of her rope. We'd ask her how she was doing, and she would cry. She came to church hoping to find a community for herself and Leo. She liked that we held Sunday school during the first half of the service, so that once a week she could get 30 minutes that was just for her. But Leo and Sunday school did not mix. Instead of sitting quietly and listening like the other children, Leo raced around the classroom, pulling books off shelves, ignoring teachers, disrupting lessons, generally making Sunday school impossible for everyone. I was not in charge of Sunday school. That was our children's minister's job. But the whole church staff strategized about what to do. We quickly decided the solution was for an adult to mind Leo, basically a one-on-one babysitter to stop him from being so disruptive. And surprise, surprise, no adult was willing to do that. I remember saying, then Allison will have to stay with him herself. Not once did I or anyone else on the staff ever consider changing how we did Sunday school. We could have tried less listening and sitting still and more movement and learning through play. Leo and other kids too might have benefited with a different approach. I suspect that what we all wanted was for Allison and Leo to go away. And before long, they did. We never saw them again. The first generation of Christians are trying to build a movement. The story is laid out in the Acts of the Apostles. Jesus' resurrection from the dead is so astonishing, so marvelous, that the disciples have to tell people the good news. God's love can heal people, set people free, transform lives, even defeat death. And as the disciples begin sharing that good news, people begin joining the Jesus movement. Christianity grows explosively in its first few years. The first new Christians are all Jews from Galilee, like Peter, John, and Mary Magdalene. And the disciples know what to do with newcomers who are just like them. But then the good news about Jesus spreads to some Samaritans, members of a rival religion that had split from Judaism several hundreds of years before. Jews and Samaritans don't normally have anything to do with each other. Now Samaritans are wanting to join the church. And the disciples have to make a decision. Is Christianity only for people just like us? Or are we willing to change to include these new believers? The Acts of the Apostles tells us what the disciples decide, that they have to open their hands and reach out. They send Peter and John to visit Samaria, and Peter and John pray with these new Christians and lay hands on them. As they do, the Holy Spirit blows into the lives of the Samaritan Christians. Once the Spirit shows up, that's it, you're in. You are part of the church. And the Holy Spirit blows through the disciples too. John the Baptist had promised that Jesus would baptize with the Holy Spirit and fire, with his winnowing fork in his hand to separate the wheat from the chaff. The disciples came to Jesus as whole stalks of grain, wheat and chaff together. Jesus' winnowing fork and the wind of the Holy Spirit shake off the chaff. The disciples' insistence on having their own way, their suspicion of outsiders, their pride, and take off the chaff to be burned. The Spirit leaves the wheat, the disciples' generosity, their faith in Jesus, their integrity and willingness to try new things, and Jesus gathers the wheat into his granary. The the disciples decide to include the Samaritans in the church. They might think that's the last change they have to make. But the Spirit keeps blowing, keeps sending more and more new people to the disciples. Next is a man called Saul, who's been hunting down Christians and handing them over to the authorities. Jesus appears to Saul and calls him to follow, and he does. He becomes a Christian and changes his name to Paul. And the disciples have to set aside their justifiable prejudice against Paul and learn to trust him. After that is a Roman soldier named Cornelius, whom an angel sends to Peter. And Cornelius is the biggest challenge of all. He's not Jewish. He's not even a Samaritan. He is a Gentile. And because Gentiles don't follow Jewish dietary laws, Jews and Gentiles do not eat together. They cannot be part of the same church community. What's the church going to do? The disciples meet for a council at Jerusalem. Peter tells them what God has been doing among these Gentiles, and they pray together. And they decide to make the biggest change of all. They agree that you don't have to be Jewish to be Christian. Gentiles are welcome in the church with the same status as Jewish Christians. The problem of eating together, well, they'll figure that out together. Cornelius and then other Gentiles become Christian. Again and again in the Acts of the Apostles, the Holy Spirit brings a new person into the church, and the church has to let that new person change them. I wish I had remembered that when Leo and Allison, that unique little boy, and his mother came to church. Instead of changing to welcome them, my parish decided to stay exactly the same and be a community for quote-unquote normal children. Years later, I can imagine how devastating that was for Allison, a single parent with a tough kid who really needed support. And I can imagine how Leo views Christianity. He's nearly grown up now. He probably thinks we're a bunch of hypocrites who preach welcome, but don't really mean it. I can't blame him. I wonder what gifts Leo and Allison would have offered us if we'd been willing to change the way we did Sunday school. I wonder how God would have worked in and through them to spread love and healing to this hurting world. And I wish I hadn't had to fail those two beloved children of God so badly for Jesus to separate my wheat and my chaff. I would really like Jesus to strip away my need to be right, my need to have things be my way, and take them off to be burned, leaving the wheat of humility, open-heartedness, and a willingness to try things and see how they go. One of the Holy Spirit's greatest gifts to us is a second chance, an opportunity to do things differently next time. And I find that at St. John's, not only because our parish is blessed with a steady stream of newcomers, but because long before I got here, you all made the same decision the early church made, that you would let new members change you. I'm not sure you realize how remarkable that is in a 220-year-old church community. You all know who you are, and you're willing to change as who you are changes. Just in the last year, I noticed the new social events John Ross is coordinating, and how Jennifer Hughes has revitalized our involvement with faith-based community organizing through Bread, and the way Josh Mullett's insightful questions have shaken up the Wednesday Bible study, and the group for Gen X and millennial women that Laura Wallace and Dana Whitley are starting. It's exciting to witness what the Holy Spirit is up to through all these new members. The Spirit brought another new person to St. John's today, as baby Wade was baptized at the 9 o'clock service. He's only 6 months old. We have no idea who this child will be or what he will become as he grows up. What we do know is that Wade, like every person who joins this church community, will invite St. John's to change. Maybe he'll have a severe nut allergy and St. John's will have to become a nut-free church for him. Maybe he'll turn out to be the next great rock and roll drummer, and we'll install a huge drum set up in the balcony for him to accompany the choir. It will be a great adventure to find out who will become with Wade as part of us. The Holy Spirit is on the move today, dear ones. She's blowing through our lives, shaking us up, clearing out our chaff, revealing the wheat God knows us to be.